Good morning. In this week's discussion, I'm going to be covering recent scholarship on Jonathan Edwards and the radical revivalism in the Connecticut Valley in the 1740s. Beginning on July 5th, 1741, Jonathan Edwards began a series of sermons in Massachusetts, ending in Enfield with one of his most famous sermons, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. The significance of this sermon is the amount of scrutiny that's been applied to it throughout the centuries by literary critics, scholars, and students through rhetorical analysis. Edwards not only employed images to support his presentation, but he skillfully used repetitive phrases and allowed the competing ideas of terror and hope to inspire people through that sermon. This had the effect of allowing personal emotions and themes to be rationalized and carried out in physical acts. Still, most theologians and historians have labeled this as an anomaly in his work. Instead of arriving at a natural progression or the apex of his work, over and over the historiography of the journal reviews of Edwards, there's a rehashing of the same conclusions or a dismissal of his work as an anomaly. Instead, really it should cause historians to admit they just quite haven't figured out how to put the sermon into their narrative. Leah Eric Schmidt takes a shot at this by calling them out for continuously citing it and then reprinting it. She concedes that this is a trend leveling and perhaps subsiding, ultimately leading us to George Marsden's work, and a discovery of George Whitefield and his sermon in 1740. This was a grand sermon, and Edwards immediately after warned against the theatrics and histrionics, producing false conversions, counterfeits, errors of judgment, which was ironic coming for Edwards because he continued that in his own sermon, Sinners. A proper study of the primary source account of Stephen Williams, a clergyman who was present at the time, brought tears to his eyes, and he accounts how he and Edwards and other clergymen had to settle the people down and calm them from their fears that resulted from the sermon itself. History points to the lore of the Enfield sermon and its credit for the immediate revival it supposedly stirred. But in reality, the available sources conclude that the sermon occurred at the height of the revival, and that Edwards, along with George Whitefield and others, had an effect in aggregate over the entire region. The people were ripe to receive the word. Revival excesses gave way to undesired behaviors and excesses in violence and preaching of terror. It took on a life of its own. And so the message became one of grisly punishments that God would visit on the damned. This was a radical departure from Calvinism, and unlike Edwards, had he gone too far, Wisniewski doesn't end his work with a typical conclusion or summary. Instead, the article just tapers off in reflection, but it leaves an impression of a surprised Edwards, somewhat alarmed at the passions of the sermon he stirred, and a caution of excesses. So it was not an anomaly, but a progression that deserves a conclusion, one which is not provided in this work and requires a continuation. Look forward to discussion on this. Thank you.